Hello and welcome to Catholic Answers Live. I am Cy Kellett, your host, and we've got 2 great hours to look for. Jimmy Akin with us, both hours, and it's an Ask Me Anything of the internet variety. We have got tons of questions. Well, we get tons of questions from the internet. We get tons of questions from all different sources. And Jimmy collects them up for us, and we get to do these shows where we just answer questions from the internet. I always find these kind of fun because sometimes you get questions. Well, first of all, you can get questions from people who can't call during the show for one reason or another, and that's fun. But it's also fun just to, get maybe a variety of questions. We get an interesting variety of questions from the internet. Jimmy Akin, of course, is senior apologist here at Catholic Answers, the podcaster behind. Well, I don't even know how the podcasting world is surviving while he's here. He's on so many podcasts now. I'm not sure how it's still going on. But of course, Jimmy Akin's Mysterious World and many other podcasts. Hello, Jimmy Akin.
Hello, Cy Kellett, and this is just one more podcast that I'm on, so don't worry. I'm still feeding into the podcast world, even at the moment.
Is there such thing as Catholic podcasting without Jimmy Akin? I don't know about that. And of course, Jimmy Akin's Mysterious World is you look at things from the perspective of both faith and reason. So I'm not limiting that to just being a Catholic podcast. That's one that's. That it's reaching people all over the world of all different backgrounds. It's a very popular show. But now you got the Jimmy Akin podcast.
Yes, which is more specifically faith-related. So on Jimmy Akin's Mysterious World, we look at all different kinds of mysteries. Some of them are historical, some of them are true crime, some of them are paranormal, some of them are UFOs. There's all kinds of stuff. But in the Jimmy Akin podcast, we look specifically at the mysteries of the faith.
And there's plenty of those. So check them out. You can find Jimmy on YouTube, and that's increasingly a popular. But you get the video, you get all that. Or you can find him virtually anywhere you get your podcasts. You can find Jimmy's work. So check him out. AKIN, Jimmy Akin. All right, about let me see. Can I carry the 1 million questions to get through today? So Jimmy, off we go.
We better get started then.
Keith asks this, considering most of your show is about theology, I was wondering if you experience anything on the more personal side.
Well, I'm not entirely sure what Keith is asking. I assume he's asking if I have experiences that are personal that are related to theology, in other words, religious experiences. And, some people report a lot of religious experiences. They have feelings that, they believe guide them and stuff like that, or they have visions or things like that. I don't have that. For the most part. I do have feelings like when I receive communion or, sometimes after confession, I feel particularly close to God. So that's an experience on the personal side. It's not among the more dramatic experiences that people have. I have had notable experiences that fall into a category that is referred to as synchronicity. The concept of synchronicity was that are religious synchronicities.
Yeah.
Synchronicity as a category was defined by the psychiatrist Jung, who was, I think Swiss. And he defined them basically as a meaningful coincidence where something happens that is coincidental, but it's not just coincidental, it's also meaningful to the person that has it. The classic example is one from his own work as a psychiatrist, where he was talking to one of his patients. He was giving her therapy, and she had kind of reached an impasse because she was approaching everything super rationally, and she wasn't really looking at her emotions in the way that would allow her to make progress. She was just thinking strictly rationally. And she was telling him about a dream she had where someone gave her a golden scarab, like the beetle, like a piece of it was like a necklace or so, like a piece of Egyptian jewelry or something like that, and it was like a golden scarab. And just at that moment, he heard this, he's in his office and he hears this tapping at the window, and he looks out and there's there's a yellow-colored beetle trying to get into his window. And so he opened the window and he reached out and he got the beetle and he presented it to the patient and said, "Madame, you're a scarab."
Wow.
And that meaningful coincidence to her let her start focusing on her emotions more and not just thinking rationally about everything. And so it enabled her to make progress in their therapy sessions. Well, I haven't had a golden scarab, but I have had situations that at important moments in my life where something very meaningful happened. Like, for example, when my wife was dying, several of these happened. One of them was, you know, she had been alienated from her father for like 20 years because her parents had divorced when she was small, and her husband her father had never um, been around after that. You know, her mother didn't want her husband around, and so Renee took that kind of personal, and she didn't even want to invite him to our wedding. But when it turned out that Renee had terminal cancer, um, she started rethinking that and said, "Do you think we should tell him?" And I said, "I think he would want to know." And so we found his phone number somehow. He didn't live in Arkansas; he lived in another state. And we called the number, and we didn't get him. And we left a message. And then shortly thereafter, we got a call back, and it was a really startling call once the circumstances were explained, because he was not at home
Mhm.
at the time. He was on vacation, and someone he had looking after his house just happened to listen to the phone message and realized how serious it was and called him where he was on vacation to let him know that he needed to call us. So he did. But so that was coincidental enough. But then it turned out where he was on vacation was in Arkansas.
Oh, wow.
And and so all he had to do was get on a bus and come up to Fayetteville, and I met him at the bus station, and took him to see Renee and left him alone for like 20 minutes. And he explained that he wanted to be around the kids, but his former wife just wouldn't have it, and that's why he hadn't been in contact. So I left him alone for about 20 minutes, and they totally reconciled.
Wow.
And just a few
Yeah.
weeks before she died. And then on the morning of Renee's death, I uh, I I happened to call. It looked like this likely was the morning she was going to die, and so I happened to talk to Scott Hahn on the phone that morning, and he was heading out to go do a holy hour, and I asked him to please pray that that Renee would pass soon, and that it would be, it wouldn't be painful and things like that. And so he went to do his holy hour, and she died while he was doing his holy hour, praying for exactly what happened.
Wow.
And so that was another very meaningful coincidence to me. And so I don't have regular visions or,
Hmm.
regular feelings, like God wants me to do this or God wants me to do that. But I have had meaningful coincidences.
Keith, thank you so much for that beautiful question to get us started. I think we'll just go right to the break, and we'll come back with more questions from the internet for Jimmy Akin on Catholic Answers Live.
Catholic Answers Live with Jimmy Akin is coming right back.
Underwriting for Catholic Answers Live is provided by Real Estate for Life. Real Estate for Life connects home buyers and sellers to real estate agents while supporting pro-life organizations. On the web at realestateforlife.org.
Underwriting for Catholic Answers Live is provided by Magnificat. Published monthly, Magnificat features texts of daily Mass, prayers, articles, meditations, art commentaries, and more, in step with the liturgical rhythm of the Church, on the web at magnificat.com.
Hi, this is Father Mike Schmitz. Please join me for Ascension's Bible in a Year and Catechism in a Year here on EWTN Radio. We're going through the entire Bible and the Catechism in 365 days. If you've ever wanted to understand what it means to be Catholic and allow those truths to shape your life, this is for you.
Bible in a Year and Catechism in a Year with Father Mike Schmitz, tonight at 10 p.m. Eastern, 7 p.m. Pacific on EWTN Radio.
Welcome back to Catholic Answers Live. I am Cy Kellett, your host. Jimmy Akin is our guest both hours, and we've got just a stack of questions from the internet. It's an internet Ask Me Anything with Jimmy Akin. And sometimes on the internet, people have funny names. I shouldn't say they're funny. This might be the name that their mother gave them. I don't know. But the next question comes from Duff Beer. And if Mr. Duff Beer, if that is your actual name, I apologize for saying sometimes people have funny names. Jimmy,
if that is your name,
if that is your name,
you know the most famous instance of that?
No,
it's from the movie Dr. Strangelove, or How I Learned to Stop Worrying and Learn to Love the Bomb. And so in that movie, Peter Sellers plays three parts, and one of them is a British liaison to the American military. And so he's in his office and you know, at a military base, and everything's going wrong, and the military, because the base's commander has gone crazy, and the other American soldiers start storming the base, and they're trying to prevent nuclear war from happening because that's what the base commander went crazy about. And one of the soldiers who's besieging the base finally breaks in as Peter Sellers, as the liaison, is trying to figure out something crucial. And he needs to get this, he's figured out this crucial message, and he needs to get it to the President of the United States, who he also plays, urgently. And so he wants to make a phone call, but this is back in the days of payphones, and he doesn't have the right change for the payphone. And so he orders the American soldier who's broken in to shoot a Coca-Cola machine for him so he can get change.
I forgot this part. Oh yeah.
Yeah, and he refers to him. He looks at his name tag and says, "Bat Guano, if that is your name." and finally, the Bat Guano is hesitant to shoot the Coca-Cola machine and says, "If this doesn't work, you're going to have to answer to the Coca-Cola company."
That is such a great movie. I forgot that scene.
It's a really well-crafted movie.
Peter Sellers, unbelievable performances in that. Three completely different characters, all 100% believable. Just amazing. All right, Duff Beer, if that is your name, would it be permissible for a Catholic to believe that God knows all possible universes and chose to create the one we are in, where we have free will, and God reveals himself and incarnates as Jesus to help us know God, but that the universe basically runs on its own and our choices are our own? Would that be a way to reconcile that God has a plan, but that we also have free will?
So if I understand what Duff Beer is proposing correctly, I think the answer is yes. I mean, God knows all possible worlds. Everyone agrees to that, who's a classical theist. So God knows every single world that could happen. And God chose to create this one, and he also chose to have Jesus incarnate in this one. So he picked a possible world where he chose to incarnate. He also picked a possible world where we have free will. And so we're allowed to make our own decisions, and they play out over the course of history. I'm wondering if there's a little more to the question, because he refers to basically letting the universe run on its own. And then if you propose that, that could mean a number of different things. I mean, classically, you have the William Paley, argument that God is like a watchmaker and this was a common view during the Enlightenment, that God was basically like a watchmaker who wound up the universe and then lets it run. And the question then becomes, how do you account for miracles? And, because God does on this view where Jesus incarnates, that is itself a miracle. That's an intervention of God in the universe after creation. And so we have at least that miracle, but then how do you account for all the other miracles that are, for example, reported in the Bible? Don't they represent supernatural or divine interventions? in the history of the world?
Mhm.
And most people would say yes, but not absolutely everyone. There have been people like the Jewish scholar Moses Maimonides, who proposed, based on some views that were circulated in Judaism, that God designed the laws of nature so that there would be notable deviations from their normal operation at certain times. So, for example, God designed water to work in such a way that it automatically parts at the moment of the Red Sea crossing.
Oh.
And so it's like God didn't do that himself. Instead, he built it into the laws of nature that this would just happen at this moment. And on that view, you could propose that, God was more like a watchmaker. Now, you still got the incarnation to account for. But you could propose, if you wanted, that God just designed the laws of nature so that there would be exceptions occurring at certain moments in history in order to accomplish the miracles that we experience. And they're actually just part of the laws of nature. It was the water of the Red Sea was always going to part at that moment because it's just how water is built. So you could propose that, and that would get you a little more in the direction of God being like a watchmaker who winds up the universe and then lets it run. But I think that hypothesis that Maimonides proposed is a little overcomplicated. We have a phenomenon in modern science that's sometimes called overfitting, where what you do is if you have a bunch of data and you're trying to describe a mathematical function that predicts the data, you can overfit it. You can make a curve that gives you a reliable, if not exact, prediction of what the data will do in the future. But you can also overfit it to the curve, and it'll produce inaccurate predictions. And so it strikes me that proposing every single miracle is written into the laws of nature strikes me as kind of like overfitting the data. I think it's better to say, no, we've just got a general law, and water does not normally part in this, is not programmed to part in this way at this time.
Right.
What happened in the Bible, God sent a wind to do this, is what happened.
Duff Beer, thank you very much for the question. This next question comes from Kitty. Kitty asks this, Jimmy, why does God allow miracles in some cases, but not others, especially in reference to Matthew chapter 18, verse 19, which states, "Again I say to you, if two of you agree on earth about anything they ask, it will be done for them by my Father in heaven." For example, why does this not apply when groups of people are praying for someone to be healed and they are not?
Well, sometimes it does apply to people, when they're praying and the person gets healed. But that doesn't happen in all cases. And so we have sort of two questions here. One, we have I guess what you could say is an ontological question, or a question about, what actually happens when prayer requests are not granted. Why would God allow that? And then secondly, we've got an exegetical question of how do we square it with this statement here in Matthew 18? Well, in regard to the first one, we know that God only allows evil, like not being healed, in order to bring about an equal or greater good. So if someone does not get healed, then that's an evil. It's a physical evil. And so there is some equal or greater good that God is going to bring about by allowing that evil. We can then speculate on, what is the greater good, for whose sake God is tolerating this evil. But it's often hard to know in this life what the greater good is. Often all we can do is speculate. There are also, and this then we kind of bridge into the exegetical question, or the Bible interpretation question, because the Bible indicates there are certain things that serve as defeaters for prayer. James talks about this in his letter, for example. He says at one point, you don't have stuff because you don't ask for it. So one reason you don't get prayer answered is you're not praying. But then he says, or you ask with bad motives. And so bad motives is another reason why sometimes prayers are not granted. That's one reason that prayers are sometimes not granted. I'm not accusing anyone in this situation of having bad motives. If someone's sick and people are praying for them, I would I would presume they have good motives. But there are defeaters for prayer. You know, so that Scripture refers to. But that leads us to the broader question of how do we explain this promise here in Matthew 18, which sounds very absolute. If two of you agree on earth about anything they ask, it'll be done by my Father in heaven. That sounds very absolute. But the thing is, Jesus used hyperbole. And we see that it's like when he says, if your hand causes you to sin, cut it off, or if your eyes cause you to sin, pluck them out. Well, he doesn't mean that literally. That's hyperbole. That's exaggeration to make a point. And here we have something similar. This is basically a hyperbolic encouragement to pray, but it's not meant to be taken strictly literally. We know that from a variety of other passages in Scripture. Like, for example, when St. Paul talks about how God, in order to keep Paul from being excessively prideful, God allowed Paul to be tormented by a messenger from Satan. And he says he prayed 3 times for God to take the messenger of Satan away. And God said, nope, my strength is perfected in your weakness, so you're going to need to live with this. And so, and similarly, Paul tells Timothy, no longer drink only water, but take a little wine for the sake of thy stomach, because wine contains alcohol. They didn't know this then, but wine contains alcohol, which is an antiseptic, and so it could help kill off any negative germs that Timothy has in his stomach that is causing him stomach problems. So but that would indicate, Timothy was not just miraculously healed of his stomach problems. And so Paul recommended a more conventional medical treatment for them. So we know from other passages in Scripture that as Christians, we don't have an absolute promise. And therefore, we should look at the statement in Matthew 18 rather as an encouragement to pray, but one that also includes some hyperbole.
Thank you very much for the question, Kitty. I appreciate that one. I was looking at the name of next. This is a wordplay name, and it took me a minute to get it. Mischievous. Probably people hearing it will get it immediately, but
it's 2 names, Miss and Cheesius.
Yeah, Miss Cheese.
Yeah,
and thank you, Miss. I assume your last name is Cheesius. And here's the question from Miss Cheesius. Jesus said, "I am the way, the truth, and the life. No one comes to the Father except by me." Did he mean that he, Jesus Christ, is the door, or did he mean the way, the truth, and the life is the door, or both?
Well, so Miss Cheesius is bringing together 2 passages from the Gospel of John. The reference to Jesus saying, "I am the door," that's in John chapter 10. Whereas the reference to him saying, "I am the way, the truth, and the life," that's in John chapter 14. And so just speaking in terms of Bible interpretation, neither passage is meant to directly comment on the other. So I would say that Ms. Cheesius is raising an interesting question, but the 2 passages are not actually directly commenting on each other. Instead, what they're doing is expressing similar truths. And so I would say just take each passage on its own. What's the truth it's expressing? Well, in John 10, Jesus expresses that he's the door, and so you need to enter by him. Whereas in John chapter 14, he says, "I'm the way, the truth, and the life." So you need to pursue him. He's the way, that means the road. So, he's the road you need to take. And he's also the truth and the life. And so you're going to get truth by pursuing Jesus, and you're going to get life by pursuing Jesus. But Jesus is the focus here. He's the door. He's the way. He's the truth. He's the life. It's all about Jesus. It's not about a door being the way, the truth, and the life, or the way, the truth, and the life being a door. Those are just images that are being used to communicate the centrality of Jesus. So I would say it's all about Jesus here in both passages.
Miss Cheesius, Thank you very much for the question. Jimmy Akin is our guest, and all of these questions are from the internet. We get lots of questions from the internet. Jimmy certainly does, interacts with lots of folks on the internet. You can find Jimmy's stuff. Check him out on YouTube. He's constantly got new and fine stuff on YouTube. Also, you can get the podcast, Jimmy Akin's Mysterious World, and the Jimmy Akin podcast, wherever you get your podcast. We have to take a very quick break. That's what that music means, but we have slightly less than 1 million more questions to go through with Jimmy when we come back on Catholic Answers Live. What was the church like in its infancy? In a word, Catholic. And Joe Heschmeyer has the receipts. In his best-selling book, The Early Church Was the Catholic Church, he gives you the details from the historical records of the first 2 centuries of Christianity. Right now, get a copy for just $10, plus free shipping if you live in the continental United States. Get more information and order The Early Church Was the Catholic Church at theearlychurchwascatholic.com.
Is orthodoxy an alternative to the Catholic Church? In a time of uncertainty for many Catholics, orthodoxy can look like greener pastures. Answering Orthodoxy, the new book from Catholic Answers Press, explains why Catholics who are thinking of leaving need to think twice. There are important reasons to remain in the Catholic Church and convincing answers to Orthodox claims. Order your copy of Answering Orthodoxy today at shop.catholic.com or ask for it at a good Catholic bookstore near you.
Is the Catholic faith still a rock amidst the waves of history? Why does it so often seem to be a mess? In his latest book, Confusion in the Kingdom, best-selling author Trent Horn helps you to get to the roots of the present chaos, explaining the destabilizing movements within Catholicism and exposing the harm and scandal progressive Catholicism has caused. Order your copy of Confusion in the Kingdom today at shop.catholic.com or ask for it at a good Catholic bookstore.
Our Lord needs articulate defenders of the truth to spread the joy of the Catholic faith. Catholic Answers monthly giving club, Society 315, helps you fulfill the call in 1 Peter 3:15 to always be prepared to make a defense for the hope that is in you. For as little as $10 a month, you'll help Catholics grow in faith, bring lapsed Catholics home, and lead non-Catholics to the truth. Go to casociety315.com and join today.
Jimmy Akin, our guests both hours on Catholic Answers Live today. I'm Cy Kellett, your host, and I get to do the reading today because all of our questions have come from the internet and lots of wonderful questions for Jimmy today. This one comes from Sammy UAW 774. And Sammy asks, does Mary have the same kind of guardian angel that we do? Could it possibly be Gabriel? Is there any other value in contemplating the guardian angels of others?
Well, so we got 3 questions there. The first one, does Mary have the same kind of guardian angel as we do? Well, presumably she has a guardian angel. When you say the same kind, it gets a little more ambiguous because she has a very special role in God's plan, and she's the mother of the Messiah, and so she might have a special kind of guardian angel. She's going to have unique challenges being God's mother. And so she might have a guardian angel who's specially equipped to help her meet those challenges. So we could speculate about that, but fundamentally we're not told. So it kind of has to remain at the level of speculation. When it comes to could it possibly be Gabriel? Well, we're not told it's not Gabriel. And so hypothetically, yeah, I guess it's possible it could be Gabriel. I can see arguments both for and against that. One of the things that you find out about Gabriel is, so we know he has other functions besides being Mary. If he's Mary's guardian angel at all, he has other functions, like he delivered information to Daniel. He shows up in the book of Daniel and interprets visions for Daniel. And he also shows up to give information to Mary. And so one of his he's the angel who does the Annunciation. He also, in Luke, shows up to Zechariah before he even shows up to Mary. So so we see him functioning even when Mary is alive as not exclusively devoted to her, to protecting her, because he's bringing information to Zechariah too. And so one of the things that we can infer based on his appearances in Daniel and Luke is Gabriel seems to have an information Farian function that he performs. And that of itself could suggest he's not a regular guardian angel. He's doing other stuff besides guarding people. Also, if you look at other Second Temple literature that mentions Gabriel, he's commonly understood as one of like the 7 or 4, depending on which work you're reading, angels of God's presence. So it seems like Gabriel normally spends his time in God's presence rather than down on earth guarding someone. And this is a recurrent theme along with Michael and Raphael and so forth. In fact, in Tobit, Raphael even says, I'm one of the 7 angels of God's presence. And it looks like Gabriel's one of those too. Now, could he be doing double duty as a guardian angel? Sure, because God can do whatever he wants. So it's possible. It's just the data we have would not point in this direction. The only piece of data I can think that could point in this direction is Gabriel's name, because angels tend to have significant names. They're what are called theophoric names. A theophoric name is one that contains within it the name of a god. So it's like in Egypt. If you have Amenhotep, Hotep means is pleased, and Amun is a god. So Amenhotep means Amun is pleased. Well, Hebrews had theophoric names too. Theophoric is a term, it means God bearing. So the name bears or carries the name of a god. Well, angelic names in Scripture are like that. Michael means who is like God? And the answer, of course, is nobody. Raphael means God heals. And Gabriel means, you can translate it different ways, but it would mean like, it could mean man of God, but it has a kind of connotation of more like mighty man of God, like hero of God or warrior of God. And if you translate it in that way, that would be consistent, certainly, with a guardian function. So you could propose that Gabriel's name implies a sort of guardian function, not for Mary specifically, but in general. So there's a little bit of evidence there, but the balance of evidence that we have does not point to Gabriel being the Virgin Mary's guardian angel. But like I said, it's not ruled out because we're not specifically told he's not. So you can speculate in that regard. I just wouldn't put a lot of confidence in it. And in regard to the third question, is there any value in contemplating the guardian angels of others? Well, I think it depends on what you mean. I contemplate the guardian angels of others, and I'll sometimes, ask their guardian angels to help them. Or I'll ask my guardian angel to encourage, their guardian angel in his activities. So it's a way of asking for angelic help for another person. But if you mean trying to figure out stuff about this other person's guardian angel, like what his name is or other things about him, I don't think we can go very far in that direction because we just don't know very much about the angelic world. Not that much has been revealed to us. We know we've got guardian angels. We know we can ask them to intercede for us, and we can ask them to perform their functions for us. But spending a lot of time in this area with speculation, I don't think is going to be very helpful because we just don't have the data we need to be able to figure much out.
Sammy, thank you. Thank you very much for the question. It's Ask Me Anything with Jimmy Akin this hour and next hour, and all the questions are from the internet. This one comes from Shlama Lama 6433. Shlama asks, you mentioned something about shared death experiences. Where someone else will be in the room when someone is dying, and someone will be in the room who is not dying, and they both experience the visions in one of your videos. Have you come across any contemporary accounts of these that are credible? Asking for my friend who is a grad student in philosophy.
Yeah, so there are credible accounts of what are called shared death experiences. Just to give a little more concrete example for people who may not be familiar with them. So, in a typical near death experience, there are a number of characteristics that are commonly reported. Not all near death experiences have the same characteristics reported, but there are certain common ones, like having an out of body experience where you float above your body and you look down and you see your body, and then maybe you go through a dark tunnel towards the light. Maybe there are departed loved ones or angels who come and help welcome you into the afterlife and things like that. Well, it sometimes happens that you've got a person who's having a near death experience. They're in the process of dying, and they're having these things happen. They're hearing music, they're seeing light, they're having an out of body experience. Their loved ones or angels there to greet them. They start going through a tunnel towards light. All that stuff's happening, and their relatives who are there in the hospital room with them see this happening. So like they themselves are seeing what's happening to their relative, and that's why it's called a shared near-death experience, because there are other witnesses who are sharing this experience. They're not themselves dying, but they're witnessing what's happening invisibly to the person who is dying. And there are credible accounts of this. The book that most readily springs to mind about them is Raymond Moody's book, Glimpses of Eternity. Raymond Moody was the guy who popularized the study of near-death experiences in 1975 with his book Life After Life, but he's written several subsequent books, and in his further researches, and he's far from the only near-death experience researcher, there are a lot of them, but he is a prominent one, and in his subsequent research, he learned about people having shared near-death experiences, and they're the subject of one of his follow-up books, which is Glimpses of Eternity. So if you want to read more about all that, check out Glimpses of Eternity.
And Shlama, thank you very much for the question. Now we'll go to a question from The Catholic Nerd. I think the correct name should probably be A Catholic Nerd. I believe I know more than one. But The Catholic Nerd asks, I was wondering about Holy Mass and space travel. If you were traveling near light speed, let's say 99%, you start to experience some heavy time dilation. Specifically, at 99% light speed, you are experiencing 14% of the time that passes on Earth relative to an observer on Earth. Would your Sunday obligation depend on Earth time or ship time, assuming there's a priest on the ship? I figured it out that there will be about 1 day for a week, so you could do Mass every day, but I was also wondering about calculating the date of Easter while you're on a relativistic speed journey. Would the priest need to start Mass at the short time that it's still Easter on Earth?
Okay, so actually the answer is going to cut in a completely different direction that the Catholic Nerd is not envisioning.
Okay.
Because if you're traveling on a ship, even if it's a ship going 99% the speed of light, you're still traveling on a ship. And guess what? People who are travelers on ships are not bound by their Sunday obligation.
Ah, okay.
and so per the there's a department, a dicastery at the Vatican that deals with situations for like sailors and travelers and people who work on the sea and travel by boat or by airplane or whatever it may be. And you're basically not bound by your Sunday obligation if you're a passenger or a worker in such an environment. And so so that kind of takes care of the question in legal terms. Now, what would happen in practice? Well, I suspect that in practice, you'd adjust to ship time. So even though a week is passing on Earth for every day that passes for you, if the priest might do daily Mass on the ship, but it wouldn't be necessarily based around the Sunday readings back on Earth. And it would be fine for the priest to just do a Sunday Mass based on the calendar at the time you left Earth. So, you continue to celebrate the standard cycle of readings and you do it once every 7 subjective days. even though time is passing faster on Earth than it is for you on the ship. And then when you arrive at your destination, you resync your calendars. When it comes to Easter, Easter is such an important feast, Christmas being the other one that's in this category, that I suspect what would happen, even though you're not obliged to attend Mass because you're traveling on a ship, is that the priest who's on board would likely try to have a special Christmas or Easter Mass synced to the time on Earth when that comes around. But there's no hard and fast rule here because the law accepts everybody, meaning accepts with an accepts. It makes an exception for everybody who's traveling on a ship. And so there's no strict law here. It would ultimately be up to the priest and what he decides to do.
Thank you very much, the Catholic nerd. I appreciate it. We got to go to a break. Are we ever going to be able to travel 99% of the speed of light? Is that a thing that's even possible? Like, could we do it?
Oh, sure.
Really?
Oh, yeah. You're going to have to spend a bunch of energy to get up to that speed. Even if you're only accelerating at 1 gravity, though, you will eventually get up to 99% the speed of light. It'll just take a while.
Oh, yeah. Yeah. All right, the Dramamine cost would be prohibitive for me if I ever had to travel 99% of the speed of light. Let's take a quick break. We'll be right back with more questions from the internet for Jimmy Akin on Catholic Answers Live.
Bringing you the truth. Catholic Answers Live. In Morse code, the sequence SOS is a distress call. It's been said that it stands for Save Our Souls. Well, right now our world is in big trouble, and we're putting out an SOS call for help. Will you answer that call? St. Paul Street Evangelization, a Catholic nonprofit, has hundreds of teams who share the good news with souls who don't know Jesus. Catholic Answers is supported in part by St. Paul Street Evangelization. Visit streetevangelization.com to get involved.
This is Jim Pinto, Director of EWTN Media Missionaries. EWTN's mission is to spread the eternal word and to teach others that Jesus Christ is the way, the truth, and the life. You can help EWTN share the good news by becoming a media missionary. Visit EWTNmissionaries.com today and join us in sharing the eternal word with the world.
Welcome back to Catholic Answers Live. It's a lot of fun to have these internet open forums with Jimmy Akin. We get to take questions from the internet and ask them of Jimmy Akin, and Jimmy answers them. And people from the internet have interesting names and oftentimes very interesting questions. This questioner is Christian Cuber, 096. I think I can't tell if it's an O or a 0, but Christian Cuber,
it's an
O. 096, asks this. It's a long one, so should I just read the whole thing, Jimmy, or did you want me to break this one up? Just read the whole thing?
No, read the whole thing. That's why it's there.
All right. Is it a correct understanding of the teaching of the Catechism of the Council of Trent to say that the expression God died is not to be understood literally, but rather figuratively? That is, anthropomorphism and or, I always have trouble with this, synecdoche. Synecdoche? Did I get it?
Synecdoche.
Synecdoche. All right. Here's what it says. It's not, however, our belief that the body of Christ alone is interred. The above words propose as the principal object of our belief that God was buried, as according to the rule of Catholic faith, we also say with the strictest truth that God died, and that God was born of a virgin. For as the divinity was never separated from his body, which was laid in the sepulchre, we truly confess that God was buried. Catechism of the Council of Trent, Article 4, Christ was really buried, Part 2.
Okay, so Christian Cuber asks if it's a correct understanding of that passage to say that the expression God died is not to be understood literally. And the answer is no, it is not a correct understanding of that passage. That's why they say in the passage itself, they say also, we say with the strictest truth that God died. So they're indicating this is literally true. This is the strictest truth. If it was not literal, it wouldn't be the strictest truth. There's no truth that's more strict than this. They not only really mean this, they really most sincerely mean this. So how are we to understand that? Well, God is a person. A person dies if their body and spirit are separated. Jesus is God. Jesus's body and his human spirit were separated. Therefore, God died. This is true via a procedure in theology that's known as the communication of idioms, whereby you can say things about God that are true of Jesus because Jesus is God. What would not be the case is that God didn't die in the sense that his divine nature ceased to exist. That didn't happen. But he did die in the sense that his human body and his human spirit became separated.
Ah, gotcha.
And since that happened to a person who was God, you can say God died.
Christian Kuber, thank you very much for the question. This one comes from Ryan B, 4780. Let's say there are two identical twin sisters, Kate and Leah. Neither are baptized, but Kate wishes to become baptized. For reasons, Leah does not want her sister to be baptized, and so has her sister kidnapped. Leah pretends to be her sister Kate and receives the sacrament. Question: when the priest says, "I baptize you, Kate, in the name," and then etc., how does this affect the validity and liceity of the sacrament? Is Leah actually baptized? What about Kate?
So when Ryan asks, and he's got an asterisk by Kate in the baptismal formula. So Kate is the sister who's not here. And the priest says, "I baptize you, Kate, in the name of the Father, the Son, and the Holy Spirit." Or if this was an Eastern Rite baptism, it might be something like, "The servant of God, Kate, is baptized in the name of the Father and of the Son and of the Holy Spirit." So you've got the name Kate in here, even though the person Kate is not present at the baptism. And Ryan has an asterisk by Kate indicating he's wondering about the name in particular, and does that affect the validity or laicity of the sacrament? Well, it doesn't affect the validity or the laicity if a priest was under a mistaken impression about what your name is and was baptizing you. Like, let's say, Cy Kellett, if you were getting baptized as an adult and the priest didn't know your name was Cy, someone told him your name is Bob.
Yeah.
And so if he says, "I baptize you, Bob, in the name of the Father, the Son, and the Holy Spirit," well, that's not going to invalidate your baptism. Mm-hmm. Because your name is not part of the essential rite of baptism.
Okay.
And so it doesn't affect validity. In terms of laicity, well, this is illicit because it's going to be an invalid baptism, because what we have here, all things being as they're described, is a case of sacramental simulation. Leah, the person who is actually here, is apparently not intended to be baptized herself. And so she's just presenting herself as a substitute for Kate so that Kate won't be baptized. So it looks like Leah has no intention to be baptized herself, in which case she's just simulating the sacrament. A simulated sacrament is automatically invalid as well as illicit. So Leah is not going to be baptized by this because she's simulating it. She doesn't have the requisite intention to be baptized. And what about Kate? That's Ryan's final question. Is she going to be baptized? Not by this act, because she's not there. She's not having water applied to her with the correct formula. So Kate is not baptized either. Leah succeeds by doing this in keeping Kate from being baptized, at least for now. What would need to happen later is, after Kate is freed from her twins' evil clutches, so notice Kate has an evil twin, is that she then needs to get baptized for real herself once she's been restored to freedom.
Be careful of the quicksand as you approach Leah's lair, her evil lair, but Thank you very much, Ryan, for the question. This one comes from Wendy Lou 9182. Listening to the Catechism in the Year has brought about some questions from me. Good job, Wendy, listening to the Catechism in a Year. If we don't sin in heaven, not because we aren't free, but because our freedom is perfected, why are the angels able to sin? Wouldn't their freedoms be perfected by nature of them being always in God's presence? Why did Adam and Eve not have perfected freedoms?
Okay, so this is a theological question, and the church doesn't have, definitive answers to every question in this area. So there's a component of what I'm going to say that's theology, rather than doctrine. But basically, standard theological opinion has been that there is a difference between provisional freedom, what you could call provisional freedom to not sin, and perfected freedom of not sinning. And we have what Adam and Eve had, and what the angels initially had was provisional freedom from sin. So they didn't have to sin, they weren't bound to, but they did have the freedom to do it. And apparently God wanted this, it's sometimes called a probationary state, not in the sense of, being sentenced to probation in a modern court. Probation means, based on its etymology, it means a state in which something is proved or tested. And so this was the period where they were being tested to see whether they would follow God or not. And that happened both for Adam and Eve, and it happened for the angels. And then God's intention was, after this probationary state, we would be confirmed in whatever choice we made. We'd either be confirmed in goodness, so we'd have perfected freedom where we wouldn't sin, or we would not be confirmed in goodness. We'd be confirmed in sin. The standard account, and this is theology rather than doctrine, is that for the angels, this all happened in a flash. And so at the beginning of their existence, they had a probationary period that was very brief, and they either became confirmed in goodness or evil at that time. For us, our probationary period extends over the course of our lives, and at the last moment of our life choice becomes fixed, and we're either confirmed in goodness or in evil at that point. So we just, because of human consciousness works different than angelic consciousness, we have a more stretched out probationary period according to the common account. But not everyone in Judeo-Christian history has held this view. There are, in fact, in the Old Testament and in Second Temple literature and in some references in the New Testament, it seems to envision the possibility of angels falling more than once, or at least falling later in history than right at the beginning of creation. And this is, for example, the view in all of the ancient Jewish literature of what's going on in Genesis 6, which is obviously way after creation week, and where you have angels who are falling at that time. Paul in 1 Corinthians seems to envision the possibility of angels falling in his time. So there is some indication that that angels may not have simply fallen at the beginning, which raises interesting questions like, did they have a longer probationary period, or are they not all perfected in goodness, or what exactly is going on there? Now, all of that's speculative because these passages are debated. I'm just wanting to make you aware that there's more than one opinion on this in Judeo-Christian history, and so there's some additional room to speculate because the church doesn't have a definitive teaching in this area. But I've given you the standard opinion, and then noted some exceptions or some things one could appeal to if you wanted to go further.
Wendy Lou, thank you for that question. Thanks to everybody who has sent questions in. We've got a lot more to come. We're going to continue next hour with Ask Me Anything, the internet version with Jimmy Akin on Catholic Answers Live. Lots more questions to come. Don't forget, you can check out Jimmy's work at mysterious.fm for Jimmy Akin's Mysterious World. And he's got the newer podcast, the Jimmy Akin podcast. Find it on YouTube or wherever you get your podcasts. We will be back in just a moment with more questions from the internet for Jimmy Akin on Catholic Answers Live. Welcome back to Catholic Answers Live. Having more fun than I should be allowed to have. Jimmy Akin's here, and we've got a whole bunch of questions from the internet, and I love to read the internet names. It's, life's small pleasures. So
you didn't originally.
No, because you have helped me with that by adding spaces. Because I couldn't read them when they were all jammed up as single words. So, like, the next guy is Carbonated Dipping Jam 4970. If I saw that like on the internet, it would all be squished together, right, as one word.
Yeah.
That's hopeless for me. I just don't have that kind of brain. So I do appreciate that. I still struggle with some of them, but all right. Well, let's get right back to it. Now that I've said his name, Carbonated Dipping Jam 4970. That's what Jimmy's here for, to answer questions. Jimmy Akin, of course, senior apologist here at Catholic Answers. And this is what Carbonated Dipping Jam 4970 wanted to ask. Supposing a cannibal eats a Christian, and then the cannibal gets converted, who gets which bits in the resurrection?
Well, we don't know because we're not told. So this is a matter that we don't have a definitive answer to. We can speculate on it a little bit. In the Middle Ages, it was speculated that at least some of the matter that passed through our bodies and was in our body at the time of our death would end up in our resurrection bodies. So some of the matter that was in the cannibal's body at the time of the cannibal's death, since obviously the Christian's death seems to precede the cannibal's death in this scenario.
Yeah.
So some of the matter that was in the Christian's body at his death will end up in his resurrected form, and some of the matter that was in the cannibal at the time of his death will end up in the cannibal's resurrected form. But there's no specific teaching that it has to be, any particular chunk of that matter. And so that's an open, exactly what it's going to be is going to be left up to God. It's also doubtful that hardly any of the matter that the cannibal consumed is going to end up in his body. I mean, it depends on when he ate the Christian, but most of what we eat is not necessarily going to be incorporated into our physical form, especially permanently, because number one, our bodies are not that efficient in terms of extracting energy and nutrients from what we consume. That's why we have poop and urine, is because those are the parts we're not using. Then a good bit of what we do extract from the food we eat is used as chemical energy to fuel our bodily processes, and it ends up getting released, if nothing else, in terms of heat, or it gets released in terms of just moving around and things like that. And so that doesn't become permanently part of us either. And then even if we do incorporate some of the matter that we've consumed into our bones and muscles and cells and so forth, not much of it's going to go into the bones if you're an adult, because our bones don't grow very much while we're an adult. I mean, they do repair fractures and stuff, and we have all kinds of microfractures happening regularly, especially in our teeth, because and our jaws, because they're put under more stress than most of our bones are. And so there's an ongoing replenishment of to heal those microfractures in our teeth. There's an interesting story about that I'll tell you in a moment. But most of what we get is not going to be put in our bones, so that would mean it's in other bodily tissues. But other bodily tissues besides our bones have a fairly rapid turnover rate. So unless you ate the guy at a very precise, limited space before you yourself die, you're going to have almost none of him in you anyway. So because either you didn't absorb it the first time, or it got used as chemical energy, or it was in your cells, but then they turned over, and so it ceased to be in your cells. So there's not going to be a lot that is there, and so God's got lots of options to pick from. You might propose that that since the cannibal did something wrong here, that he's going to end up not with the best bits, that the Christian who he ate is going to end up with the best bits. But we're so far into, we don't know how this works, that I think we just got to leave it up to God. Now, everything I've said thus far is based on the traditional theological understanding of this question. More recently, the Dicastery for the Doctrine of the Faith and the International Theological Commission that it operates have noted that there isn't a guarantee that God's going to necessarily take matter from our final form of our body in order to compose our resurrected body. If God wanted, he could come up with completely new matter that was never part of us and rebuild our resurrected body. At least that's held up as a possibility today. There's also another possibility, depending on your interpretation of quantum mechanics, that I can mention, which is maybe both the Christian and the cannibal end up with the same particles appearing in two places at once. So
what just happened? Carbonated.
Yeah. So that's an additional possibility. Now, I promise you an interesting story.
Okay. Yes.
Connected with the microfractures that occur in our teeth. Okay. So, our bones and especially our teeth are composed with a lot of calcium. And calcium is an element, it occupies a particular column on the periodic table. And the reason the periodic table is called periodic is because everything in the same column on the periodic table has similar chemical properties. And so there are like 8 periods on the periodic table. When you come back around, the 8th element is going to be in the same column. It's going to have similar chemical properties. That's why, for example, if you don't want to have salt, which is sodium chloride, you could have potassium chloride as a salt substitute, because potassium is in the same column as sodium, and so it tastes kind of like sodium. So potassium chloride tastes kind of like sodium chloride. Well, okay, guess what else is in the same column as calcium? Radium. Oh. And radium is a radioactive element. And so what happens is if you ingest radium, your body will see it as if it's calcium.
Uh-oh.
And it will try to rebuild your jaws and your teeth with the radium instead of the calcium. And there have been some frightening results of that in history that I may one day tell on Mysterious World. For example, there was this drink that they had back in the day called Radiathor. And Radiathor was basically water that had a little bit of radium infused into it. And the idea was, radium releases energy, right? So, that's what radioactivity is. So if you drink Radiathor, it will release energy and you'll feel more energetic.
Oh,
and so it was marketed as a health tonic.
Oh.
And there was this millionaire who was fabulously wealthy, who could afford all the Radiathor he wanted to drink.
No.
And so he did. He thought he was taking it as a health tonic. He's drinking Radiathor every day. And his body was taking the radium and replacing the calcium in his jaw with it. And eventually his jaw kind of fell off. And so it didn't end up well for him. There were other people. These individuals are known as the Radium Girls. And what they did was they worked in watch factories, because back in the day, when people wore watches, they would often have glow-in-the-dark watches. And what made the numbers in the hands glow in the dark was radium, because it releases radioactivity, and so it would glow in the dark. And so they would have this radium paint that they would use to paint the watch faces so that people could read them in the dark. And so you have this whole factory full of women who are using radium paint, and they've got their paint brushes and they're dipping it in radium paint, and then they're painting the dials, and then they pass them on and they turn into watches. Okay, except how do you make sure you've got a good point on your brush?
Tip it on your tongue.
That's right. You put it on your tongue, and you get the radium paint in your mouth, and the same thing happened to them.
Aww.
So
poor radium girls.
Yeah, but this is an illustration of how even when we're adults, our bones do still grow some.
Oh man. I mean, I feel bad for the radium girls. Carbonated dipping jam. Thank you for that disgusting question, and because it got us a fascinating answer. Now we got to take a quick break. We'll be right back with more questions from the internet for Jimmy Akin on Catholic Answers Live.
We'll be right back with more great answers from Jimmy today on Catholic Answers Live.
Do you have a question but prefer to ask it privately? Catholic Questions can help. Go to CatholicQuestions.com to ask your question online, email us, drop us a letter, or give us a call. Longtime Catholic Answers Live apologist and author Jim Blackburn or another Catholic Questions apologist will be happy to assist you. Catholic Questions proudly supports Catholic Answers Live, so visit us at CatholicQuestions.com today. That's CatholicQuestions.com.
Catholic Influencers is a great podcast from Australia. It studies the weekly readings and breaks them down into layman's terms, showing you how they're relevant to our life today, making theology accessible for everyone. You can hear Catholic Influencers as well as faith-filled podcasts from our friends and affiliates around the world, all in one place. All free at EWTN Podcast Central. Visit EWTN.com/radio and click Podcast Central today.
I just feel so bad for the radium girls. I'm going to get over that. Again, thanks for everybody who sends in their questions. We gather up the internet questions for Jimmy sometimes, and we have these fun shows where we take the internet questions, and I get to read the names. Noah Perry and that seems like a regular name. I can't figure out if I think that's a real name. Noah Perry.
Well, most people don't have 9167 as part of their name.
Well, that's true. I thought he could be the 9100th and 67th Noah Perry. I don't know. Noah asks this: is the requirement to receive communion to not be conscious of mortal sin or grave sin? I ask because the official canon law says grave sin, but grave sins can be venial in the case of addiction.
Yeah, this is a drafting issue in some recent church documents. Traditionally, the classical language of mortal sin was used, historically, but then in the last few decades, a decision was made to speak in official church documents like the Code of Canon Law more in terms of grave sin, but it means the same thing. When they say grave sin, they mean mortal sin. So it's confusing. I would have advised them to stick with the traditional language because it's what everybody understands. But they mean grave sin that you are fully culpable for. They don't mean something that has been mitigated down to venial level.
Ah, gotcha. Okay. So Noah, thank you very much. I hope that was helpful to you. Good Lord. Caius Hospitalis, 1707. I guess, I don't know. Caius Hospitalis, 1707 asks this. Hello, Mr. Akin. Could you clarify the Catholic teachings on burial, specifically concerning what is and isn't permitted and what is preferred? I've been told that cremation isn't forbidden, but scattering ashes is, due to our desire to respect the body. Thank you for all you do. You helped me a lot on my journey to Catholicism.
So in terms of how the question is phrased, he asks about burial. And burial is something that can happen with either an intact body or parts of a body, like if someone's been dismembered or something, or it can happen with ashes. And in terms of what's permitted on burial, there's an expectation that people are going to be buried in the Catholic Church. They're going to be buried in some form. And so you're not allowed to just like leave a body outdoors to be eaten by microorganisms. You're supposed to bury it. And that could be the whole body, or it could be parts of the body. I should mention that it also is possible to donate a body to science, for example, or parts of the body to science. So in those cases, you don't bury whatever's been donated, but if that hasn't happened, you do bury it, whether it's intact or in parts or cremated. Now, when it comes to cremation, the historic practice has been, you're right, you're not supposed to just scatter the ashes, because if you do that, it destroys the memory of the person. There's no place like where the ashes are interred so that people can go and pray for the person and remember the person and stuff like that. It's not that it's against divine law to scatter the ashes. The church hasn't said that, but it's our practice to keep the ashes together. However, there has been a modification on that point just recently. One of the questions, and this is actually based on something that happens with non-cremated bodies. If you go to Europe, for example, you will see in various monasteries what are known as ossuaries. Now, classically, an ossuary was a box that you put the bones of a person in after the flesh had deteriorated off of them. And they used ossuaries a lot back in Jesus's day. What they would do is they would put the body on a niche in a tomb and come back in a year. And by the time they came back, the flesh had largely rotted away from the bones. And so they then cleaned the bones and put them in a box known as an ossuary, where they would be, and then they'd reinter the ossuary, and that would be the person's form of long-term burial. Well, ossuaries have taken other forms in other ages. And so if you go to some monasteries in Europe, where you've had the monks living in this monastery for centuries, what some of them have done is build the ossuary itself. This is like a big room. They've built it out of the bones of the former monks who used to be in that monastery. And so you can go in, and like the walls are made out of the bones of former monks, and they've got lamps hanging from the ceiling that are made out of the bones, that kind of like chandeliers, that are made out of the bones of former monks. And the reason they do this is it's a memento mori. Memento mori means remember death. And so Christians down through history have periodically had reminders of the fact that we're all going to die. And those reminders are called memento mori. And so for the monks in the monastery, building a room out of the bones of the former monks is a pretty good memento mori. And so so you do have situations where the body parts of multiple people are mixed together. So you've got multiple skeletons being mixed together here. And that led to a question that the Dicastery for the Doctrine of the Faith recently answered. Could you do the same thing with ashes after cremation? Now, they're not really ashes, because what happens in a cremation is the flesh burns away and gets basically turned into smoke. What's left over is the bones of the person, and then they crush the bones, and the cremated remains, or cremains, that they give you after cremation, it's actually crushed bone, not ashes per se. But if you can do this with intact skeletons, could you do it with crushed skeletons? Could you do it with, the cremains or the ashes after cremation? And the DDF said, yeah, you can do that. You can take at least some of the ashes that that came from a cremation and mix them with other ashes from other people. But if you do that, we want you to preserve the names of the people who are in this kind of ash pool. So that just like in a monastery, the names of the former monks are remembered, so people can still pray for them and stuff like that. And so you can essentially do the same thing. You can mix the ashes of different people as long as you preserve a record of their identities, so they can still be prayed for by name and so forth. And so that's the most recent ruling. So there has been development in terms of Catholic practice as opposed to doctrine. But there's been a development in terms of Catholic practice happening with respect to cremated remains, and we may see that trajectory continue into the future.
All righty. Thank you very much, Caius, for that question. This one comes from Daniels, 7250. Can you explain the problem with Islam? Is the word of Allah separate from Allah?
Okay, so well, the problem with Islam is it's based on a false revelation. The angel Gabriel did not really appear to Muhammad and narrate to him all the stuff that's in the Quran. So that's the fundamental problem with Islam. It's just based on a false set of revelations. In terms of, is the word of Allah separate from Allah in Islamic thought? So Allah is just the Arabic word for God. Allah is not a different God. It's just the Arabic word for God. Jewish Arab speakers refer to God as Allah. Christian Arabs refer to God as Allah. It's just the word for God. It's a cognate of the Aramaic word Elah, which is the same. It's just the vowels a little different, but it's the same root word. So the question becomes, is the word of God separate from God? Well, in Islamic thought, yes, because they don't have the concept that we Christians do of the Logos, or word of God. You know, in the beginning was the word, and the word was with God, and the word was God. So we've got that concept where God and his word can be understood as the same. So that's why Jesus is divine as the word of God. But they don't have that concept. So the word of God, as found in the Quran, is understood to be distinct from God. It is not the same as God. It is something that comes from God, but it is not itself God.
Daniels, thank you very much. I hope that one was helpful. This one comes from Hemlock999. What was Jesus' life like in childhood and adolescence?
Well, we're not given a lot of information. We have an appearance of Jesus when he's 1 or 2 years old. That's when the Magi visit. We also have another appearance when he's 12 years old that's mentioned in Scripture, where he gets lost and found in the temple. But beyond that, we're not given a lot of information. Luke says after they find him in the temple that he went to Nazareth and was obedient to Joseph and Mary. So Luke makes sure after that temple finding thing, he wants to make sure we understand he was not disobedient to Mary and Joseph. And so we know he was obedient. We're told he grew in wisdom and stature and favor with God and man. So he had a positive, godly childhood. We also know his parents were in the lower class economically. His father, Joseph, is a tectone, to use the Greek word. It means a workman, not necessarily a carpenter, but someone who works with their hands. And we know that they didn't have a lot of money because Mary, for her purification, offers a dove, which is what you offered if you were too poor to afford a more expensive animal. So he basically had a lower class lifestyle growing up as a child in Galilee that was pretty typical for the time. He learned his trade from his father, which was typical for the time. And he was a godly child who was obedient to his parents. But beyond that, we don't have a lot of data.
Daniels, that was Hemlock. Hemlock999. Thanks very much for that one. I think we've got time. I'm going to try Zaro Bass. Zaro Bass has a question. What is the Catholic understanding of free will, and how can we argue for it? It would also be great if you could show how it affects the Catholic view of predestination.
Okay, so we're going to have the hard break coming up here in a minute, so I'm likely to have to finish this on the other side of the hard break. But basically, the Catholic understanding of free will is what's sometimes called libertarian free will, as opposed to compatibilist free will. So in philosophy, libertarian free will is the kind of free will that a person has if nothing outside of them determines what they're going to do. And broadly speaking, Catholic theology is, nothing outside of you forces you to do what you're going to do, and nothing inside of you forces you to do what you're going to do. And that's the kind of freedom that's known as libertarian. On the other hand, compatibilist free will understands that there are prior conditions to you making a decision that dictate what you're going to do. But there's more to say about that, and I'll say it on the other side of the break.
All right, we'll be right back, Zaro, to get the rest of the answer to your question and lots more questions from the internet for Jimmy Akin on Catholic Answers Live. When the resurrected Jesus appeared to disciples on the road to Emmaus, they didn't recognize him until the breaking of the bread. The same is true today. In the Holy Eucharist, we really meet Jesus. In The Eucharist is Really Jesus, author Joe Heschmeyer explains how knowing Jesus in the Eucharist is the key to understanding all of Christian faith. Order your copy of The Eucharist is Really Jesus today at shop.catholic.com or get it at a good Catholic bookstore.
Our Lord needs articulate defenders of the truth to spread the joy of the Catholic faith. Catholic Answers Monthly Giving Club, Society 315, helps you fulfill the call in 1 Peter 3:15 to always be prepared to make a defense for the hope that is in you. For as little as $10 a month, you'll help Catholics grow in faith, bring lapsed Catholics home, and lead non-Catholics to the truth. Go to casociety315.com and join today.
We hope that one of the things that we communicate here at Catholic Answers Live is that our Catholic faith allows us to be fully serious about all the problems we encounter in the church and in the world, but it also lets us have light hearts and maybe even mix in a bit of fun, and that is exactly what our good friend Joe Heschmeyer does in his popular podcast, Shameless Popery. You should check it out at shamelessjoe.com. Joe's got a deep grasp of the faith, morals, the teachings of the church, all that, but he's also got a witty conversational style. He entertains and he informs, but you will leave equipped to better answer the most common challenges, misconceptions, and questions about the Catholic faith. He's got insightful guests, he does on-air debates, and he takes a close look into all the things that you want to know about as a Catholic living today. You'll walk away knowledgeable and filled with joy. Look for Joe on his YouTube channel. Check him out at shamelessjoe.com or wherever you get your podcasts. And if you like what you hear, become a patron. Welcome back to Catholic Answers Live. Jimmy Akin, our guest, right in the middle of an answer for an internet question from Zaro Bass. And the question is basically, what is the Catholic understanding of free will and how can we argue for it?
Okay, so just to recap, the Catholic understanding of free will is basically what's called in philosophy libertarian free will, which is that when you make a decision, there is no set of prior factors, either inside of you or outside of you, that determine what choice you will make. The choice is itself a free choice. There is another kind of free will, though, called compatibilism, and the idea here is that there is a kind of free will that is compatible with the idea that everything is determined. Now, in the first kind of free will we mentioned, in libertarian free will, you notice how I said prior events do not determine what choice you make, either prior events outside of you or inside of you. So this is a form that is not complete determinism because your choices are not determined by anything else. But there are some people who want to say, no, everything is determined, including your choices, but they're still compatible with free will somehow. And so compatibilist free will typically says that there are prior factors such as your own desires, that determine what you will choose. But because no one is forcing you to make the choice you do, you're just choosing in accordance with your desires, you still have meaningful freedom. And so that's the compatibilist position. They want to say free will is compatible with everything being determined. Well, that is not the Catholic view. That view is advocated by Calvinists, but not by Catholics. Catholics want to see a more robust freedom where your desires or whatever do not simply determine what you choose. You can choose contrary to your desires. So there are some complicating factors, though, like in Catholicism, the Thomistic position is actually pretty close to Calvinism. The challenge is then for Thomists to be able to articulate how their views regarding predestination and so forth, which are quite similar to Calvinist views, how they don't remove free will. So this is the problem for Thomists. How do you both maintain your predestinarian beliefs, which are very strict, and at the same time preserve free will? And non-Thomists typically look at what Thomists say and say, you guys aren't doing it. Your views on predestination imply a lack of freedom, and you haven't mounted a convincing defense for why we still are free in the way the Bible and the church envisions our freedom. You effectively squashed free will or true freedom out of your system. So that's both the Thomistic idea and the criticism of the Thomistic idea. So that's where the debate focuses in Catholic circles is, with regard to Thomism, is have they adequately preserved free will or not? And people can have different opinions about that. Now, in terms of predestination can work in a number of different ways. If we're talking about predestination to salvation, which is actually not what's mentioned in the Bible, but we can still talk about it theologically. If we're talking about predestination to salvation, it could be that that God looks at what people choose to do in history and then assigns people a destiny to either heaven or hell based on their free choices. So if people freely choose to cooperate with God's grace, he determines a destiny for them of heaven. And if they freely choose to reject God's grace, he determines a destiny of them for hell. So in this case, predestination is based on the choices that people freely make with this libertarian free will. And this understanding of predestination actually has support in the Catechism of the Catholic Church. If you look at paragraph 600 of the Catechism, at the moment it's talking about Jesus's predestination to go to the cross, but it says in paragraph 600 that everything in history is present to God he's outside of time. So everything is present to God in its immediacy, the past, the present, and the future. And so God, when he formulates his plan of predestination, he sees people's free will choices and incorporates them into his plan. So in this case, it's not like God forced Judas to betray Jesus or forced Caiaphas to convict Jesus or forced Pilate to execute Jesus. Instead, when God from his eternal now looks at AD 33, he sees Judas, Caiaphas, and Pilate doing those things freely, and he incorporates them into his plan. So Jesus ends up being predestined to go to the cross. But the way the passage is formulated, it seems to be articulating a more general principle. It says, that God incorporates the free will decisions of people when he makes his plan of predestination. That makes it sound like a general principle. And so that would support the idea that predestination works by God in seeing what people freely choose to do and then incorporating their free will decisions into his plan. So that's one way that predestination can work. But Calvinists and Thomists are going to disagree with that. What they're going to say is that, nope, God does not base his predestination of people on their free choices. Instead, he bases his predestination of people on nothing at all other than his own choice. So on this view, and in Calvinist circles, this is called unconditional election. On this view, God just picks certain people, not based on anything about that person, not based on their free will decisions. He just picks certain people based on his own choice, and says this person's going to heaven. And he either picks or passes over other people who therefore go to hell. And so the determination of whether you're predestined to heaven or hell on this view is not based on your choices. Instead, it's based on God either picking you or not picking you based on nothing other than his own will. And so that's what Calvinists and Thomists are going to say. So that is a permitted opinion in the Catholic Church, but it's a little then hard to square with robust free will, because obviously God has said if you don't respond to his grace, you're not going to go to heaven. So it would seem that if God just arbitrarily picks you to go to heaven, you're going to be forced to accept his grace. It doesn't look like you have meaningful free will in that case. So that's a sketch of how these concepts relate. I could obviously say more, and I'm having to compress things for time reasons. But if you'd like to learn more, I've been covering this on the Jimmy Akin podcast lately. You might want to check out episode 2 about how God's foreknowledge works, and you might want to check out episode 12 on whether everything is predestined. And there are a few other episodes you might want to check out, because I've kind of been exploring this area on the Jimmy Akin podcast lately.
Zaro Bass, thank you very much for the question. We've got time to do another one before we have to take any more breaks. And Nyrock Dayrog 3973 asks this: what are cardinals, and how did that position become established?
Okay, so the term cardinal comes from a Latin term, cardo, which means hinge. So like the hinge of a door. And hinges are what things turn on. The door turns on its hinges. And so what happened was, over in Rome, they had a bunch of clergy. The Pope is at the top, but then he's got other priests and stuff working for him, and deacons and stuff like that. And some of these ended up being important people that the Pope would rely on for, if he's making decisions, he would have them as counselors, or he would entrust them with specific tasks. And so these people became known as the cardos, as the hinges, which eventually became the cardinals. And so the cardinals are like the hinge people, the hinge personnel in Rome that the Pope relies upon to get stuff done. They're his counselors. They execute tasks for him. They elect the new Pope when there's a vacancy. So they're like the hinge guys. They're the guys everything turns on. Now, originally, all of the cardinals were members of the clergy in Rome that grew up in Rome or whatever, or at least were based there permanently. But what happened over time was the Pope decided he wanted some broader representation than just the local clergy. So he would appoint cardinals from other parts of the world to perform these functions for him. So, for example, the Archbishop of Paris or the Archbishop of Los Angeles might be appointed a cardinal. And what that would mean is they technically do have a position in Rome, as there are certain churches in Rome where, the Cardinal Archbishop of Paris will also be a cardinal priest of this church in Rome, or a cardinal deacon of this church in Rome. So they're technically members of the Roman clergy of the city of Rome, even though they spend most of their time in Paris or in Los Angeles or in Buenos Aires or wherever they may be based. So they have kind of a split gig going. Most of the time they're in their home diocese, wherever it is, but they also technically are a clergy member of a church in Rome, and thus a member of the Roman clergy And so cardinals are still the hinge members of the Roman clergy, but a lot of them are not actually based in Rome these days.
Nyrock, Dayrog, thanks very much for the question. It's Ask Me Anything for Jimmy Akin of the Internet Variety today. Lots more Internet questions to come for Jimmy right after this on Catholic Answers Live.
Hang on. Catholic Answers Live will return in a moment.
Underwriting for Catholic Answers Live is provided by Real Estate for Life. Real Estate for Life connects homebuyers and sellers to real estate agents while supporting pro-life organizations. On the web at realestateforlife.org.
One of the biggest mistakes a Christian can make is to try to do good without God's help. St. Therese said, when we trust only ourselves and not God, our soul becomes incapable of virtue. Her remedy? Works of charity. And the greatest work of charity is to share the gospel. At St. Paul Street Evangelization, a Catholic nonprofit, we encourage you to share the gospel with someone who doesn't know Jesus. Catholic Answers is supported in part by St. Paul Street Evangelization, streetevangelization.com.
Proclaiming the faith, changing lives.
The year was 1999. The shrine of the Most Blessed Sacrament of Our Lady of the Angels Monastery in Hanceville, Alabama is consecrated. Mother Angelica says, the happiest day of my life was the day this church was dedicated.
To learn more about Mother Angelica's life and the history of EWTN, visit EWTN.com/Mother Angelica.
Welcome back to Catholic Answers Live. Jimmy Akin's our guest, and we've got lots more questions from the internet for him today. And this one comes from Traditional Girl 3943. And Traditional Girl wants to know this: I know that God brings a greater good from evil. From evil he allows, and that he helps save our brothers and sisters through our efforts. But are those the only answers to why God would allow tens of millions of people to starve under Mao or Stalin? Or why so many people, including children, are trafficked and satanically ritually abused? I mean, the scale of human pain is mind-blowing. Is the realization of our impotence in the face of evil and our need to surrender to God for help the point? Thank you.
Okay, so once again, we're looking at the problem of evil. The answer to the problem of evil is always the same. And you've already said it, Traditional Girl. God would not allow an evil to exist unless he was going to bring about an equal or greater good through that very evil. So we can then speculate on what that evil is. And in the case of moral evils, like murdering tens of millions of people or allowing tens of millions of people to starve, free will is an important factor. You know, God wants love. That's his highest priority. That's why it's both the first and the second great commandments is love God and love your neighbor. But he wants love that's freely chosen. And so in order to allow the free will to freely choose love, he must allow that free will to be abused. And in some cases, like Mao or Stalin, people have gotten themselves into positions in society where when they misuse their free will, it has horrific consequences. God will ultimately bring about greater good from that, and we can speculate on what that good is, but usually we can't know for sure in this life. So we have to trust God because we're kind of in the position of small children. Sometimes parents, for the good of the children, allow the children to experience painful things. Like if you're a small child, your parents are likely to take you to the doctor so you can get vaccinated. And at the time, you as a small child, you don't understand the purpose of the vaccination. It just seems scary and painful to you. But as you grow up, you learn, okay, there was a reason for that. By having this tiny little small amount of pain with the vaccination, it spared me a horrific disease later in life. And so we can appreciate from an adult perspective what are the decisions of our parents. Well, that's essentially the position we're in now with respect to God. We're like little kids. We don't have a big perspective on the world and what's ultimately going to happen as a result of the pain that we suffer. But we can trust God that let's say in the next life, when we have more information than we have in this life, we'll be able to appreciate the perspective, and then we can understand exactly why God allowed particular evils. But most of the time now, we just can't know. And so if one is in the midst of suffering, it's understandable that one is concerned about this. But once you understand the principles, unless you're in the midst of extreme suffering, you're not going to be able to make a lot of progress in terms of figuring it out. So, it's not worth spending a lot of time on, because you won't be able to make a lot of progress. There are just things we don't know in this life. I will also have one note. Traditional Girl mentions large numbers of children being trafficked, and that's true. There is human trafficking, including children, and it is present on a large scale in the world. But she also mentions them being satanically ritually abused, and that actually is not common. I'm not saying it never happens, but back in the 1990s, there was what's called the Satanic Panic, where there were all these reports of satanic ritual abuse happening, and people's lives were ruined and they were sent to jail. And it turned out that a lot of it was based on false memory syndrome, where counselors actually unintentionally induced people to have memories of things that never actually happened. And so that led to a situation where there were a lot of exaggerated claims regarding satanic ritual abuse. It's not that it doesn't happen, but it is very rare. And so I would just urge a little bit of caution in that regard. And I hope that's helpful.
Thank you very much, Traditional Girl. This one comes from Rich. If we will have free will in heaven, will it happen again that some might have the choice of being fallen angels and the repercussions thereof? This would be when the kingdom of God arrives on earth and after final judgment.
Yeah, so the standard view has always historically been, no, once we're in heaven, we're going to be confirmed in goodness. Our life choice becomes fixed at the point of our death, and so we're not going to fall again. We're not going to have to worry about falling into sin. On the other hand, as I mentioned earlier, and the same thing has been the traditional view of angels, that their life choice became fixed at some point in the past, and so the ones who chose not to fall, they're not going to fall at any point in the future. However, as I mentioned, there is some indication in the Bible that angels may have fallen at different times, and that raises some interesting questions in this area. It's not certain that they fell at different times, but there are hints of that. And if those hints reflect reality, which they may not, then it would raise some interesting questions, at least for the angels and how their wills work. But in terms of our wills, I would stick with the standard view that, once you're a human and you're dead, you don't fall again.
Rich, thank you for the question. This one comes from Timbo Slice 980. Recently, a real archaeologist, Flint Dibble, debated Graham Hancock, a pseudo-archaeologist. Are you still...
By the way, for an archaeologist, Flint Dibble is a great name.
I know. I almost felt like, how is he the real archaeologist? That sounds like a movie archaeologist. All right. So are you, Jimmy, still planning on doing an episode on pseudo-archaeology? Would you consider interviewing someone like him for it? There seems to be a war brewing between mainstream archaeology and a few camps of pseudo-archaeology online. I have to admit, I was in one of these camps until I watched a good volume of your material.
Well, thank you. I'm glad that my material has been helpful to you. So this is more of a mysterious world question, and I do plan on doing future episodes on aspects of archaeology, including pseudo-archaeology, and critiquing it and talking about what the problems with it are. In terms of bringing on and interviewing someone like Graham Hancock, I wouldn't rule it out altogether, but I tend not to interview people I'm going to be critiquing, because I want to be fair to everybody, and bringing someone on just to critique the person is something that it's not that I would never do it, but it's something that I would be very careful about doing. Because if someone's walking into a debate, at a minimum, they need to know that, because otherwise it's not fair to them. And so I tend to actually avoid interviewing people if I'm going to offer a critique of that person. So like I would have a critique of Graham Hancock. And so I probably would be less likely to interview him so that I could give an unencumbered critique.
All right. Thank you very much for the question and for allowing me to read the name Flint Dibble. Rebecca asks this question. I would like to know if it's true that Our Lady of Fatima told Lucia that Francesco would pass and his soul would be in purgatory until the end of time.
Go ahead.
Okay. It is hard to believe that a child would have such horrible sins that would keep him there for so long.
Well, so in regard to the question, is it true? The answer is no. It seems that Rebecca may be thinking of two different events. One of them was there was apparently a young girl in Fatima who had, I guess, died and had a reputation for doing immoral stuff. And allegedly, Mary told Lucy that that girl would be in purgatory until the end of time. But she didn't say that about Francesco. Instead, what she said was he'll go to heaven, but he needs to pray a lot of rosaries. So it seems like these two different events are what you're thinking of. And I would also note, even if Mary told Lucy this, well, it didn't happen because Francesco is a saint. He's in heaven now. And
right.
he didn't spend the rest of time in purgatory. On the other hand, I agree that the claim that a child could commit such horrible sins that they need that much time to be purified is not entirely plausible. And in fact, we don't even know that time exists in purgatory the way it does here. Purgatory, as Pope Benedict XVI said in his encyclical Spe Salvi, its duration cannot be calculated in earthly time. So it could be instantaneous for all we know. But it's certainly hard to imagine a child being so disordered that they would require the rest of world history in order to be purified. Of course, we don't know how long the rest of world history is. Maybe it's not that long. But this brings up another point which has been discussed recently by the Dicastery for the Doctrine of the Faith. If you look at their norms that were released in 2024, and this is there in seed form, even in the 1978 norms, but they become more explicit about it, there is a human element in private revelation. So you can't just take what a visionary reports and say, oh, that's exactly what Mary said. If it seems like there are problems with it, like there are problems in this case, like how could a child possibly be that sinful and so forth, then there's a good likelihood that Mary either didn't say it or didn't say it exactly that way, or it's not being remembered in exactly the way Mary said it. So I would say if there was this girl who had a reputation for doing things she shouldn't, that would be an indication that she's going to be in purgatory. And maybe Mary said something like she's going to be there for a long time, from a child's perspective, a long time, which, how time moves for children, a year seems like forever. And that got understood by Lucia, who's a very young child at this time. That got understood as like the equivalent of the rest of the history of the world. But I would think it's very doubtful that Mary would have actually literally said this.
Rebecca, thank you. I think people say Lucia, and I said Lucia, and I think it's because they have this new character, Luce.
It's actually because in Portuguese, the C is pronounced as an S, not a CH.
Yeah,
so
but in Italian,
in Portuguese, it's Lucia, not Lucia.
Yeah, but that's what I'm saying. I think I said Lucia because I was thinking of Luce, the little the little Italian pilgrim. Well, thank you, Jimmy. I always enjoy the 2 hours with you. That was a lot of fun.
My pleasure.
Check out Jimmy's work at, you can look up, just search for the Jimmy Akin Podcast, search for Mysterious World. If you want to go directly to Mysterious World, go to mysterious.fm. All of it is on YouTube. All of it is also anywhere where you get your podcasts. Thank you to everybody who sent their questions in. That'll do it for us. We'll see you next time, God willing, right here on Catholic Answers Live.